all four platforms. Hello, my friends, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Zoom. We are very glad that you're with us. I am Carol Copeland Thomas, and this is, I believe, our 16th US UK Summit on Race experience. It's going to be an amazing experience today, and we are very glad that you are with us. So I'm going to go on. Again, we're on four different platforms, and we're so happy that Deandra Robinson is going to be monitoring that. We want you to put questions in the chat. Make sure that you pay attention to all the conversations that are going on. This is going to be interactive from that point of view, and we really appreciate you being here. I'm going to do one more thing while we are exchanging information. Let me go back to my Zoom audience. We're just glad that you are with us. Let me go back there. Let me go back to my keynote slide first. There we go. All right, great. And let me continue on. So again, we are broadcasting live, and we're just very excited that all of you are here with us today. That's what I want. Okay, I'm going to do one more thing, and then we will continue on with our experience here in our program. Great. We're very glad. Oh, thank you for putting all your cities and states. I know we have at least 3 or 4 countries that are here. So that's super exciting. And we want to make sure we mute everybody. Deandra, you can probably help me with that as well. We want to make sure everybody is muted. We want to do that. And we will continue on. Here we go. We'll mute all. Let me ask everybody to put yourselves on mute. I'm going to do that. And all right, everybody should be muted at this point except our speaker.
Carol, you're muted.
Oh, okay. Let me go on. Thank you very much. I don't think I'm muted now. Is that correct?
You're okay now.
All right, awesome. Thank you so very much for doing that. We're just getting all of our technical capabilities in place. So again, I'm super excited because we do have our 4 platforms in place. We absolutely want to thank our sponsors. Meet Boston, our lead sponsor, and all that they do during these amazing times and interesting times. We say thank you so much. The TJX Company, Loomis Sales, State Street Corporation, Eversource, Eastern Bank, Lurie Davis Wealth Management, and our media partners in Minnesota and here in the Boston area. Thank you all so much for what you do and for making this program and these series of programs possible. We really appreciate you. Now, I would like to read, and then I will turn it over to my very capable partner. I want to read a statement that we will be releasing in the next couple of days on behalf of the US UK Summit on Race. And I'll read it quickly. It says, the US UK Summit on Race stands strong in defense of Black History Month, racial equity, and democracy in the United States. This statement reflects the values, perspectives, and advocacy positions of the US UK Summit on Race on matters of public concern and is issued as protected political speech. When we launched the US UK Summit on Race in May of 2021, we could not be fully anticipated the profound impact it would have on our supporters, our sponsors, and the broader community. For the past 4 years, co-founders Dr. Garth Dallas, William Wells, and I have engaged in ongoing deliberation about how to maintain relevant while intentionally keeping the word race at the center of our mission and identity. Our initial launch followed the first anniversary of George Floyd's death, a tragedy that resonated deeply, particularly given that William Wells lives in suburban Minneapolis and that his church is located just blocks from where Mr. Floyd was killed. At a moment, we made a deliberate decision to stay the course and affirm race as a central part of our work. Now, nearly 5 years later, the need to address race openly, honestly, and courageously is more urgent than ever. The US UK Summit on Race affirms the legitimacy of Black History Month and rejects ongoing attacks on racial equity initiatives, immigration reform, and democratic norms in the United States. Reports and firsthand accounts of aggressive immigration enforcement activity in Minnesota are deeply alarming and demand immediate scrutiny, accountability, and restraint. These developments have generated widespread fear and uncertainty with families and communities and raised profound moral and humanitarian concerns. And you'll be able to read the rest of what we have said, but I do want to end with this because this is all about the First Amendment. We call on the federal government to listen to the will of the people, the voices of individuals gathering peacefully in communities across the United States from Alaska to Florida. We demand a recommitment to democratic principles rooted in the freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. And it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. On the 6th day of February 2026, during Black History Month, the US UK Summit on Race stands firm in its commitment to democracy, justice, and racial equality. And it is signed Carol Copeland Thomas, William Wells Jr., and Dr. Garth Dallas. That is our statement and what we want to say to you, our audience, and to the world, just based on what is going on, particularly here in the United States. And thank you. And again, that will be released in the next couple of days. All right, I'm going to turn this program over to Bill Wells. He will take it over now and continue with our conversation. Bill, let me go on and bring you up to, I'm going to first of all make you a co-host, I'm going to add you to the spotlight, and I'm going to make sure here in the eCam world that we go on and bring you on board. So just give me a second, and then you will be able to begin. Hold on just one second, and I will find that screen. And here we go. There we are. And Bill Wells. Right. All right, Bill, take it away.
Okay, Carol, thank you. Thank you for reading the Declaration. I think that pretty much sets the stage for a broader range of thinking. And we'll talk a little bit about the purpose of our summit, the global summit that we've constructed. And let me just say this: little did we realize when we first started this, 5 years or so ago, little did we realize that we would almost feel like we were going full circle. And it was precipitated by George Floyd's murder, for sure. But however, as we've seen recently, we've also had a couple of more murders here in a different circumstance. One was by the local police with George Floyd. Now we have the government intervening and creating a chaos here in the Twin Cities. But let's get back to the overall purpose for the summit. The summit is really more to provide information, to bring about greater awareness, understanding, and a deeper concern and consideration for how race really is universally created. Race is a construct that's been created and has been perpetuated on many of us. So we've got some panelists here for us today and a keynote speaker that are going to walk us through a very, very informative and enlightening way of understanding how race has really become demonized, if you will, and plays to the disadvantage of many of us, particularly people of color. Um, our purpose for this particular timing, though, in February, we have very purposely with the summit selected certain dates throughout the year where we host these events. This is February, Black History Month here in the United States. It's not everywhere, as we've learned. The UK has recognition of Black History Month, as do the folks in Asia. So, but for us, this is a particular month that we've selected that will have a robust discussion around race, recognizing that Black History Month was created here years ago, Carter G. Woodson, and it was to really promote the presence of African Americans here in the United States and to recognize the contribution. As we've heard many times, much of America was built as it's constructed today, was actually helped put together by slaves. It's, you know, without some kind of formal recognition, I think part of that history would just even be dismissed. Um, we had a very, very robust discussion months ago about what would be the theme for this particular Black History Month. So we were, you know, we looked at it from many different angles, and it had nothing to do with the particular circumstances that are occurring here in the Twin Cities. But as Garth, Carol, and I huddled together, and this is back in the fall timeframe of last year, we just continue to think about, are we making progress? Are we moving forward? Are we regressing? Are we at a stalemate? So that's how we came up with the title and the theme for today, which is called The State of Race, a Reality Check. And then we wanted to make sure that we heard voices from diverse communities speaking out, not just us. We are the facilitators, we're the moderators, and our job is to find those informed individuals and enlightened individuals that can bring even greater perspectives into the conversation. So that's what we've got for today's purpose. We are, you know, as I said, today is a reflection. Well, the month of February, for many of us, is a reflection of the contributions of African Americans in the United States. And there are different ceremonies that go across the country. I know there were some early February events at different cathedrals and what have you. And so that's good. But we need to actually do even more, because as we've seen in the media, there's hardly any coverage anymore about Black History Month. I mean, it's crickets. That's not the way it was 10, 20 years ago. And that seems to be a problem. So let me talk a little bit about the format for today. Because we've got a number of participants, I've seen people signing in. We have a chat room that's available, and you will be able to submit questions with either the keynote speaker or as we move into segment 2 with our panelists. So make sure to register your questions in through the chat room. And we have an able-bodied assistant with us today that'll be gathering that information and monitoring the questions that are coming in. And that way we'll make sure that we have participation. Again, part of this is presentation style, but the real richness of this and the robustness of this particular event comes when the participants start to engage. We've got folks, as Carol said, from several different countries. I've been watching some of the folks signing in. I see West Coast here and East Coast. There's several people here in the Midwest, some names I recognize. And I saw one from London, and I don't know what other countries. But anyway, this is a global summit. And so welcome to this global discussion. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Carol for an introduction of our keynote speaker. So again, welcome to everyone. I wish I could see you in person. I have the privilege of being with some, but this is really our community, if you will, and the community has continued to grow over the 5 years that we've been doing this. So welcome again. Your input is valuable to us. So thank you and enjoy today's program. Carol, I'm going to turn it back to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Let me do a couple of things to move things along. Hello, you all can look at each other for a second. Hello, you look great. Look wonderful. I am going to spotlight myself for everybody. There we are. And I will move. There we go. I'm just moving things along here with our program. So I know that my friends on, there we go. Here I am. Okay, great. All righty. There we go. And let me go on and do the introduction. This is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful friend and colleague, and I am super happy to introduce to some and to welcome back to others a gentleman who has courage, faith, and just enormous leadership skills. Michael Curry, Dr. Michael Curry, is the president and CEO of the Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers, which represents 50 health centers serving over 1 million patients out of 285 practice sites across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The Mass League provides clinical, advocacy, workplace data, legal, and compliance support for its members. Under Michael's leadership, the organization has doubled in size over the last 4 years, with over 100 staff, secured the largest contract in the association's history at over $300 million to administer the state's provider loan repayment program, and launched the nation's first Institute of Health Equity Research, Evaluation, and Policy. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization designed to promote and engage in community-driven research, evaluations, and public policies to achieve health equity. Attorney Curry is also a proud member and a very active member on the national board of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. He is a father, he is a friend, he is a community advocate, and we encourage you to go to the website, mssconnect.com. All of the biographical profiles are there and other information, and you can learn more about Michael Curry. Now, I'm going to do a little toggling here to bring him on board, so just hang in there with me. Let me pull Michael up because I need to. There is Michael. Great. And we're going to make you a co-host. So now you'll be able to turn on your sound. And we are also going to spotlight you. We're going to add you to the spotlight. There we are. We do all these great things. And then I will be able to turn everything over to my friend here. Okay, great. Can everybody see Michael? Can you all see him? And oh, Michael, I've got to do one more thing here in the eCam platform. Thank you very much. There's Michael. We're going to add you. Great. And there you are. I'm going to disappear. All right. And Michael, take it away.
Thank you, Carol.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start with a quote this morning. Here's the quote. What would they have if life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. I want people to take that quote in for a moment because that is the quote of Patrick Henry, one of the founding fathers of this country, the United States, that he delivered in a speech on March 23rd, 1775 at St. John's Church. He was basically advocating for the creation of a militia, arguing that we be prepared to go to war against Great Britain. What would they have if life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains or slavery. These words sat with me over the last month or two, Bill, because my son worked at the Old North Church, which is where Paul Revere made his ride and said, give me one if by land, if two if by sea. And he spent the summer as an African-American boy introducing audiences to the Old North Church. And he said to me, he said, Dad, what sat with me every time I did a tour was that if I existed in 1775 or 1776, I would have been a slave in Boston. So as we talk about the price of chains and slavery, as we get ready to celebrate 250 years of this nation in 1776, I start this conversation off this morning by asking you the question, what is the real Independence Day? Is it 1776? Is it 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation? Is it 1865 as we now celebrate Juneteenth? Is it 1964 with the Civil Rights Act or 1965 with the Voting Rights Act? I need us to now, as we get ready to celebrate this sesquicentennial, have an honest conversation in the midst of Black History Month about what is the real Independence Day. So I want to start by saying thank you for having me, Carol, for inviting me to be part of today's program. I'm honored to join my friend, Mr. William Wells, Garth Dallas in the United Kingdom, and Professor Henry, Todd Williams, and Sonia Alvarez as one of the presenters today. I am honored and humbled to be here. But with all the accolades, accomplishments that Carol read off and was shared with you before I joined this call, I want to start with something more important in my resume. That I'm a child of Mahalia Curry, who moved to Boston from Alabama for the warmth of other suns, Mr. Wells. If anyone's ever read Isabel Wilkerson's book, she moved out of the Jim Crow South like 6 million others and moved into northern cities like Boston and Chicago and New York. And I was born here. I want to share with you because the experiences and circumstances that I had as a child really informed the work that I do today. I want to acknowledge on the Zoom call today, that there are folks here from Minneapolis, St. Paul. I was a student in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I was a student of Professor Mahmoud El-Kati, one of the baddest and most phenomenal Black studies professors in this country. So I want to, just acknowledge the activists on the ground in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and my professor. Carol, can we pull up slides?
Yes.
Excellent. While you pull the slides up, I want to introduce people. I get to do a presentation across the country called Quantum Leap. Now, I don't know how many people are TV watchers and may have watched TV in the late 1980s and early 1990s, but there was a really popular TV show called Quantum Leap. And on that TV show, Sam Beckett would jump through time and he would jump into the body of a person, and he'd have to figure out through the course of that 1 hour episode why he was there and what his job was to correct that wrong or to save a life or to address that grievance. I loved that show when I was a college student sitting in Macalester College, because as we were watching the show, we were asking each other, if you could jump through time, where would you go? And I would say I'd be in the Olympics in Mexico City in 1968 with my fist in the air with Tommy Smith and John Carlos. I'd be on a slave ship in 1619 when those 20 or so slaves arrived in Virginia. I would be on the bridge in Selma marching with John Lewis if I could quantum leap. And if anyone knows the TV show, in the late, I think it was 1989, they had an episode where Sam Beckett, the character, jumped through time and he jumped into the body of a Ku Klux Klan member. And he realized halfway through the show that they were going to lynch an African-American. So Sam Beckett, the character, spent the rest of the show trying to stop the murder of this African-American. So I ask you, as we have this conversation this morning, if you could jump through time, where would you go? What would you do? I love the concept of traveling through time and being in a place, because it's different, Dr. Dallas, if you read it versus you experience it. I would argue that when you jump through time, you connect the dots differently about why people are disparately sick, disparately poor, unhoused, unbanked, why they're not in the C-suites, why they're not presidents and governors, and why we're not locked out of the economic opportunities in this country and beyond. If you travel through time, you come back with context. That's what Professor El-Kati gave us in Minneapolis, St. Paul. He gave us as students, he gave those activists in Minneapolis, St. Paul context. So when we quantum leap back into the present moment, if you're now in 2026 and you're on the streets in Minneapolis, St. Paul, you show up differently when you've been a student of Mahmoud El-Kati. So I'm not going to do what is that quantum leap presentation. I'm going to do an abbreviated version for this conversation today. That slide deck that was created after the murder of George Floyd, when I was asked to do that first presentation, was 40 slides, Dr. Dallas. And I started with what was slavery? What was the economy of slavery, the institution of slavery, the laws of slavery? I walked through what was the Homestead Act and the Southern Homestead Act after the end of slavery. What were the broken promises to those 4 million slaves, enslaved people who are now looking to recover and reconnect with family members to build a life? I walked through what were Black codes, what was Birth of a Nation, what was the war and how it's impacted on Black communities in World War I, World War II. I walked through the modern civil rights movement, and all the time I'm quantum leaping back and forth on housing, education, healthcare, law, so that people get context. And again, I say this to you, I'm going to ask you for the few moments I'm with you, I need you to quantum leap. I need you to not be in your office. I need you to not be distracted by the cat, the dog that's jumping on your lap right now. I need you to not be caught up on life and the craziness of the Trump administration. I need you to focus on quantum leaping, because when you come back, I think what Carol and Mr. Wells and Mr. Dallas is asking you to do is show up differently, because now you have that context. Carol, can I have those slides, please?
Yes.
And if not, I can share them myself. Actually, can I share them? It'll be easier for me to walk through them.
It may cause a rift with our streaming. Now,
Okay.
people on the other platforms, Deandra, correct me if I'm wrong, they can see the slides because I've been advancing them.
Yes, we can see them on YouTube and Facebook, but we cannot see them here on Zoom.
And right now, I'm at the history was not the mere gathering of facts, the Carter G.
Yes.
slide. Yes.
Yes, I'm not on that slide, just the previous slide before that, but I can't see them here. I can walk through and you can just advance the slides, but we won't be able to see them on Facebook.
Okay, just keep going. And if you can sort of create visually about the slides with Zoom, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
It would be great if we could show them, because I want people to actually see the images as well, but I will proceed and we'll see if we can fix that.
Okay.
So on February 7th, 1926, 100 years ago, Carter G. Woodson introduced Negro History Week. I want to share a quote with you. He said, "If a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated." He warned us when he created Negro History Week, which we now celebrate as Black History Month. He said, history is not just the mere gathering of facts. I'm going to repeat that. History is not just the mere gathering of facts. The object of historical study is to arrive at a reasonable interpretation of those facts. That's why we study history. So I want you to, if you could see the slide, I want to walk you through where we are.
Michael, can you see the slide now? They should be up on Zoom.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Excellent. Next slide, please. You'll see the quote there. Next slide. So let's walk through where we are. The truth. What is the truth? I love naming this slide, The Truth. What is the truth? Because for anyone who knows the movie, the film Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith's film in 1915, most people don't know the context, the storyline, but if it wasn't, as historians call it, white racial pornography, if it wasn't a blatant, overt racist film that created violence against African Americans throughout this country in 1915 and beyond, I would argue the ripple effects of Birth of a Nation are still happening as police officers walk into our neighborhoods. When D.W. Griffith was interviewed about that film, he said, "The truth, what is the truth?" And I would argue in 1915, when he characterized Black congressmen who had ascended into Congress as shiftless Negroes who had their feet up and was eating chicken and all those images of what people thought of us in 1915, I would argue that in 2026, people still carry those misperceptions of African Americans. But he said, the truth, what is the truth? So on March 27, 2025, President Trump issued and later signed Executive Order 14253 entitled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. The executive order alleges widespread effort to rewrite our nation's history, replacing objective facts with a distorted narrative driven by ideology rather than truth. This revisionist movement seeks to undermine the remarkable achievements of the United States by casting its founding principles and historical milestones in a negative light. This is your president, or many of you on the call, President Donald Trump. Under this historical revision, our nation's unparalleled legacy of advancing liberty, individual rights, and human happiness is reconstructed as inherently racist, sexist, and oppressive. Executive Order 14253. Next slide. The truth, what is the truth? The executive order, it claims that the National Museum of African American History and Culture proclaims, quote, hard work, individualism, and nuclear family to be aspects of white culture. The executive order seeks to, quote, restore federal sites dedicated to history, including parks and museums, to solemn and uplifting public monuments. The Trump administration sent a letter to the Smithsonian Institution calling for a comprehensive internal review. And if folks have been watching the news, the attack on slave memorials in Philadelphia just this past week or two, and the damaging of those exhibits. Next slide. I need you to, as we think about Quantum Leap, and I'm about to take you on a journey through history as much as I can through the time that I have with you, I want you to understand why I came to this journey. I was a student, a young person who grew up in Roxbury, poor. We were on welfare. My mother was a single mom. I went to schools that were underperforming schools. I lived in a neighborhood where all my uncles were incarcerated. When we went to downtown Boston, we were followed around department stores. When we sought to go purchase food, we didn't have the same access to healthy foods as other neighborhoods. I need you to understand that I was looking at these conditions, Mr. Williams, and as I traveled the country as a child for family reunions in Alabama or Youngstown, Ohio, or Rochester, New York, the people who looked like me were living the same way we were in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Now, if you're a child and you're 7 years old or 8 years old or 15 or 20 years old, and you see that the conditions you live in, Black folks are living that same way in every city and town you visit, or as we have United Kingdom on the call, even in other countries, it leads you to say, what's wrong with us? What is it about us that we are suffering at higher rates of diabetes and heart disease, that we don't have a generational wealth, that we're not in the C-suites? I needed an answer to that question, which didn't come until I landed in Minneapolis, St. Paul at Macalester College in Mahmoud El-Khadi's classroom. And through the course of 4 years, Mahmoud took me a travel around the world, and he took me through history and gave me the context I'm sharing with you today. So I want to leave you or share with you this quote by Ruby Bridges, the first African-American child to attend a formerly whites-only school, elementary school, the William Front School in Louisiana in New Orleans. And her famous quote is, "The danger of turning back the clock is having to relive every moment of that clock." On January, the President of the United States issued an executive order seeking to end birthright citizenship in direct contradiction to the plain text of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. The DOJ defended this order in multiple courts. January, POTUS issued an executive order that sought to stop or strip employment protections for federal workers. I need you to understand, if you're a Black woman on this call, unemployment rates over the past year remain largely steady for every group of workers in this country, for the most part, except Black women, whose unemployment rates have been rising now at 6%, 2 times white workers. In January of last year, the president issued an executive order calling for an end to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility programs, policies, and activities in the federal government. Next slide. I want to step away for a minute and go across the pond to the United Kingdom, because I think what the blessing of this call is that I do the quantum leap, which went from 40 slides in 2020 to over 600 slides today. You're getting just a taste of those slides. But when I came on and Carol asked me to be on today, I did the quantum leap across the pond and went back in history for the United Kingdom. And I can't do justice, as many of the folks on this call from the United Kingdom, with that rich history, but it gave me a chance to dig in on history that was not the primary focus of Quantum Leap. Between 1662 and 1807, Britain traded an estimated 3.5 million enslaved Africans. Only about 3 million of those survived the Middle Passage. I need folks to understand, as people say, our president says, we talk too much about slavery. I told a group yesterday, spoke to an audience of business people, mostly white, mostly men. I said, I need to challenge that notion, because if I gave you an exam on slavery, you would all fail that exam. And if American slavery lasted from 1619, arguably, to 1865, when they found out that they were emancipated in Galveston, Texas, then you should have a lot of history that you can share with me as you share American history. And of course, they would fail that test. But I would argue we would fail that test if you're African-American, a person of color on this call. And if we extended that across the pond, many of us would fail that same test. 1662 to 1807. In 1672, the newly created Royal African Company is created to regulate English involvement with the transatlantic slave trade. The company is financed by royal, aristocratic, and commercial capital. 1713, under the Treaty of Utrecht, Britain is awarded the asiento, or sole right, to import an unlimited number of enslaved people to the Spanish Caribbean colonies for 30 years. 1783, approximately 133 Africans aboard the slave ship Zong are thrown overboard, allowing owners to claim compensation money from their insurance company. 1786, Clarence Thomas Clarkson, an essay on slavery and commerce of the human species, was a seminal, quote, seminal prize-winning Latin dissertation translated into English that provided a foundational, moral, and empirical argument against the transatlantic slave trade. I don't know if I'll get to the slide today, but I wanted to make this point about 1786 for a reason. The folks who benefited from slavery, the slave owners, knew it was wrong. It is well documented in the United Kingdom and in other countries in the United States, as they imported bodies in and out of this country, that they knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew it was against their religion. They knew it was unethical. Next slide. In the late 1760s, Charles Stewart, a connection to those of us in Boston, Charles Stewart purchased an enslaved African, James Somerset, while he was in Boston. This Charles Stewart purchased this African, James Somerset, the province, and this was Boston, the province of Massachusetts Bay, and brought him back to England, where he escaped for 2 years and was recaptured. In the case of Somerset versus Stewart, in May 1772, a judgment in the Somerset case emancipated Charles and launched a movement to abolish slavery throughout the British Empire. This was really a case about the owner, his owner, trying to send him to Jamaica from England. And it was brought a case, which is a rich history that I think folks should dig in on out of this presentation. It says the case established the argument that slavery had no legal status in England, and it had no common law or statutory law basis, and as such, someone could not legally be a slave in England. So we think about case law. I'm an attorney. We think about all of the incidents that lead up, like Plessy v. Ferguson here to Brown v. Board, watching how people challenge slavery in cases, how Quake Walker cases in Massachusetts challenged the institution of slavery, even in the state of Massachusetts. The Abolition of Slave Trade Act in 1807, British Slave Trade Act of 1807, passed March 25th, prohibited the importation of enslaved people throughout its territories, the British Empire, by British subjects. And then the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, enslaved people in the colonies, excluding areas ruled by the East India Company, were not freed. Monumented is the term. Until 1838, when slave owners, not the slaves, received compensation. They had to basically buy their freedom from slave owners. They were enriched in the elimination of slavery. I want you to go to the next slide. I'm going to move fast through some slides. You're not going to be able to put too much attention because we don't have a lot of time with me this morning. I walk people to 1619. I want you to be Quantum Leap on a slave ship in those 2 or 3 months it took to take the Middle Passage. I want you to think about the stacking and packing of bodies, the diseases that were prevalent, that were common on that journey, that Middle Passage to the Americas or to the Caribbean or to South America. I need you to think about, if I was there, what would I have seen? What would it smell like? What would be the violence of slavery? As we know that many did not survive that journey, that many jumped overboard and to avoid being put into bondage. We know that many died in their journey of disease as they were stacked and packed. If you've ever been to Baltimore, there is a exhibit called The Great Blacks in Wax that you actually get to see wax bodies, human figures on a slave ship. I would encourage anyone to experience that. Next slide. So I need you again to think about slavery and the role slavery had. Now, it might shock most of you who are American on this call today that only about under 500,000 enslaved people were transported into North America. I think that shocks people. Under 500,000 enslaved people were transported in North America. Millions of others were transported into the Caribbean and South America. Why does that matter? It matters because when slavery ended in 1863 to 1865, there were 4 million slaves in the United States, in America. I want you to take that in for a moment. Valued to be worth $3.1 to $3.6 billion, more than any corn, any rice, any cattle. We were wealth for this nation, and 3.1 to 3.6 billion. We're not talking Build Back Better dollars. We're not talking some of these major bills that we're talking about. Now we're talking about human beings that were owned by other human beings that created wealth for this nation. And even when states like Massachusetts eliminated slavery, we were still benefiting off the cotton that we were producing and selling to southern states. I need you to understand the institution of slavery, the value of slavery. So we think about 3.1 to 3.6 billion dollars. Next slide. You'll see that number here. The insurance companies benefited from slavery. Our banking system benefited from slavery. It was central to our legal system and the development of our laws in this country. Our political institutions were centered around slavery. Next slide. You'll see here, and again, I'll share some of these slides with Carol Copeland Thomas. She'll share these with anyone who wants to receive them. This research I think you'll find fascinating. And I tell audiences all the time, don't trust a damn thing you see. Or I tell you, look it up yourself. I need you to go on that journey yourself. I need you to read The Color of Law, Rothstein's book. I need you to read Isabel Wilkerson. I need you to read The Souls of Black Folks, The Miseducation of the Negro. I need you to literally make this your curriculum for your activism. So I could talk here, I'll skip the slide, but just the banking systems that benefited from slavery. We were collateral for homeowners, for property owners, for slave owners. Next slide. I want to give you some top line points about Slavery's Capitalism, another book that I would encourage you to read. Phenomenal book that breaks down capitalism and how slaves were building wealth, not only for this nation, but for other nations. During the 80 years between the American Revolution and the Civil War, slavery was indispensable to the economic development of the U.S. Slavery was a foundation American institution organizing the nation's politics, legal structures, and cultural practices with the remarkable power to determine the life choices of those moving through society as Black or white. Quote, on the White Mountains of New Hampshire, we find the sugar of Louisiana. In the plains beyond the Mississippi, the cotton cloths of Rhode Island are domesticated. That was the interconnection between these states. Whether you had anti-slave laws or not, we were all inextricably linked to the institution of slavery. Facts. 19th century Americans had little difficulty grasping slavery's capitalism. Advocates in national development presume the reciprocal relationship of the slaveholding and non-slave holding states, as well as the mutual interests of the slaveholder, manufacturer, and the merchant. Slave-grown cotton was the most valuable export made in America. Foreign investment underwrote the expansion of plantation lands in Louisiana and Mississippi. Next slide. Very important slide. I need you to take this in for a moment. Between 1619 and 1865, 246 years, and of course you see the answer to the test there. I'd ask you, can you name at least 5 enslaved people from Africa to the US colonies to America, abolitionists who violently or non-violently give me liberty or give me death? Obedience to tyrants is disobedience to God. These are euphemisms. These are mantras of American independence that we're about to celebrate on a 250th, but yet most people, most audiences I ask, cannot name 5 enslaved people who violently or non-violently fought to free themselves as we celebrate the violent rebellion for British rule. I need you to take in that contradiction for me. So if you don't know about the New York Slave Rebellion of 1712, or the Chesapeake Rebellion of 1730, or the Stony Brook Rebellion of 1739, or the German Coast Uprising of 1811, I ask you, what kind of history did you get? What history did we actually get in our schools? And I don't say if you're African American on this call, I'm not talking about our United Kingdom. I'm talking about even white folks. What American history did you get if you got absent in your context, in your text, 1619 to 1865, and you can't tell us about Black liberation in this nation's history? Then I always say a phrase that who controls the narrative controls the people. This was intentional not to let you know that Africans resisted bondage, that they violently fought to free themselves, just like folks marched on the US Capitol and claimed that they were resisting the stealing of an election on January 6th, and they're branded heroes. They weren't slaves. They weren't enslaved people. And yet we got this contradiction that people are allowed to lift them up as revolutionaries, not insurrectionists. But at the same time, we're not celebrating slaves who violently or non-violently sought to free themselves. Next slide. So I need to just share this one with you because I think people know it a little bit, but Nate Parker's film, Birth of a Movement, and the controversy around Nate Parker at the time sort of distorted what I think is one of the most important aspects of history in this nation. Nat Turner, 1800 to 1831, was born on a plantation in Virginia, slave to Benjamin Turner. Nat learned to read and write in his childhood, was sold 3 times, and through religion became a fiery preacher, often expected to deliver the message of subjugation and Black inferiority. I pause there and footnote that they often use us against us. They often send us into communities to do the exact same thing that they sent Nat Turner into. You're poor for a reason because you don't pull your pants up. You don't work as hard. You're sick because you don't eat well. They don't tell the full story because they don't want you to know the first story. On August 21st, 1831, on a plantation in Southampton County, Virginia, Turner led a rebellion of enslaved people when he joined 6 others in killing Master Joseph Travis and his family, seizing arms and supplies, and enlisting the support of approximately 75 other slaves in what was described as an insurrection. The revolt would eventually result in the murder of 60 white people, the ultimate crime in the antebellum South. After an unsuccessful rebellion, Turner fled, hid for 6 weeks until captured, convicted, hung, and dissected and flayed, along with 16 of his supporters. Hundreds of others were punished, put fear into the hearts of white Southerners, resulting in even harsher laws. I need you to go to the next slide, Carol, and I'll start to wind this up in a second. 1836. I need you to know about how Congress works. The gag rule on man stealing. In 1836, the United States House of Representatives passed a gag rule that rejected all petitions against slavery. So not only did we have the institution of slavery, and I want to pause it there real quick. I tell people, I don't care how Christian you are. how kind you are, how much of a good person you are. I don't trust not nan one of y'all to own another human being for generations, maybe 8 generations. If generation is about 30 years, 30-year lifespan, or 30 years is a generation, I own you, your child, your grandchild, and on. And that was the nation's history. So they had to keep this institution of slavery protected. That's why they had a gag rule. This forbid Congress from addressing the anti-slavery issue until it was eventually rescinded in 1844, 1836 to 1844. The U.S. Senate had a similar rule that ended in 1850. Quote, strongly supported by all Southern and some Northern Democratic congressmen, the gag rule became a proxy defense for slavery's morality and economic value in the face of growing pro-abolitionist sentiment. Next slide. So as we talk about whether we celebrate 1776, and I know many of the Black folks on this call in the United States will be popping off fireworks and they'll be dressing in their red, white, and blue. And I wouldn't discourage you from doing that, but I need you to hear the contradiction though. 1788, the U.S. Constitution is ratified. Under it, slaves are considered by law to be 3/5 of a person. This is 1788, 1776, decade prior. 1808, President Thomas Jefferson officially ends the African slave trade, but domestic slave trade, particularly in southern states, was expanded. 1822, freed African Americans found Liberia in West Africa as a new home for freed slaves. 1857, the Dred Scott versus Sanford decision. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Black people were not citizens of the United States and denied Congress the ability to prohibit slavery in any federal territory. So what is the real Independence Day as we get ready to celebrate and pop off fireworks? Next slide. I won't cover this, but I need you to take in the violence of slavery. Southern laws govern slaves as well as slave owners. What few due process, the right to be heard protections that people had possessed, really, they were the rights of the slave owner, not the slave. I need you to know that slave crimes included violating curfew, attending religious meetings without a master's consent, running away. Indeed, a slave was not permitted off a master's farm or business without the owner's permission. I say this is triggering. I'm sorry. I'm sorry it's triggering. Some of you are now triggered by this history, but unfortunately, I'm telling you, because we don't know the past, we are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. We're doomed to show up in spaces that don't validate us, don't recognize our humanity, that gaslight us to think that our anger, our frustration, our appeals are not valid. That's why we study history. Next slide. 3/5 Compromise of 1787. Most of you don't know this history. The 3/5 Compromise was an agreement during the 1787 Constitutional Convention that determined how enslaved people would be counted when determining a state's population for representation and taxation. The compromise stipulated that 3/5 of the enslaved population would be counted for determining direct taxation and representation in the House of Representatives. That 3 out of every 5 enslaved people would be counted. This compromise favored southern states, giving them more representation in Congress and influencing the balance of power before the Civil War. This was the 3/5 Compromise. States in the North and the South could not agree on how slaves would be counted in the population. Next slide. That great debate for representation. The northern states with fewer enslaved people argued that slaves should not be counted to determine representation as they were not considered citizens and did not have the right to vote. This is northern cities. They were not citizens, didn't have the right to vote. The southern states, with the majority of the 700,000 enslaved population in 1787, wanted enslaved people counted fully for representation. That's their power, giving them greater power in Congress, but not taxation, not for taxation, as they viewed enslaved people as property. You see this next slide. No, let me go back one more. No, you're at the right one. Forward, Carol. Yep, one more. They knew better. This is an important part I'll make for this call today. They know better. They knew that this was evil. Many of the founding fathers acknowledged that slavery violated the ideal of liberty and was so central to the American Revolution, but because they personally benefited and were committed to the sanctity of private property rights, the principles of limited government, and the pursuit of intersectional harmony, they failed to take the bold action against slavery. Moreover, the Southern founders' embrace of slave-based agriculture and their deeply ingrained racial prejudice solidified the barriers against emancipation. Next slide. Evangelicals knew. They knew better. Douglas Wilson, founder of the Communion of Reform Evangelical, a conservative reform and evangelical theologian, the Christ Church pastor, wrote in his 1996 book, Southern Poverty, Slavery, as it was, there had, quote, never been a multiracial society which has existed with such mutual intimacy and harmony in the history of the world. I need you to take in the arrogance of that, the evil of that. Never been a multiracial society which has existed with such mutual intimacy and harmony in the history of the world, talking about slavery. The U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth attends the CREC member church in Tennessee. I need you to know that they're now blatantly, openly espousing, showing white supremacy, recasting history. The secretary is proud member of a church affiliated with the Congregation of Reform Evangelical Churches, which was founded by Pastor Doug Wilson, said Chief Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell. Slavery, quote, as it existed in the South, was not an adversarial relationship with pervasive racial animosity, wrote Wilson. Pastor Wilson admitted that there were abuses under slavery, but argued that the benevolent master is not a myth, and said that there were good people who owned slaves on a CNN interview. I need you to know you're being gaslighted. Carol, I want to wrap it up because I know you got a full program. I need you to talk about white supremacy real quick before I wrap it. What is white supremacy? It is the belief that white people are superior to those of other races and thus should dominate them. It's rooted on the now discredited doctrine of scientific racism and was a key justification for European colonialism. 1853 to 1855, French writer and diplomatist Arthur de Gobineau, essay on the inequality of human races, wrote about the superiority of the white race. He argued that Aryans, Germanic peoples, represented the highest level of human development. 19th century British writers like Rudyard Kipling advanced the theory that it was the duty of Europeans, the white man's burden, to bring civilization to non-white people through benevolent imperialism. Next slide. European colonialism. European colonialism occurred during the 15th to 20th century when European countries were looking to expand trade and colonize other lands using domination and control. In order to gain control over these foreign territories and its people, most often for economic, political, or social gain, military force and deception were used. Colonizers often distracted resources, imposed their preferred language, culture, and governance on the people. White Europeans were thought to have God-given rights to conquer and explore others, later known by the 19th century in the U.S. as manifest destiny. Next slide. Race is a social construct. Professor Mahmoud El-Kati taught us that at Macalester. Next slide. The white man's destiny. John C. Calhoun, Vice President, U.S. Senator of South Carolina, and slave owner. He was a leading proponent of slavery, arguing that the black race of Central Africa had achieved a higher level of civilization and improvement under slavery than they could have on their own. James Henry Hammond, South Carolina planter, lawyer, politician, co-authored the pro-slavery argument. Alexander H. Stephens, Vice President of the Confederate States of America, delivered the cornerstone speech arguing that the Confederacy's, quote, foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests on the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. I'm going to leave it on this because there's 1,000 more points I could make with this slide. Is I am now attacking DEI. And as I say to white audiences all the time, I say, raise your hands if you know incompetent, unqualified white people. I see some people laughing. Raise your hand if you know incompetent, unqualified white people. So if you know incompetent, unqualified white people, as I say to white audiences, but I say to you, why are you so angry about that African-American who's in your office, at the law firm, at the medical school, who might have 2-3 degrees? Who might be more qualified than anyone else in the office, but there's something about this Negro, something about this black person that makes you want to go file a complaint or go to the Department of Justice under the Trump administration. That's a contradiction, and that is white supremacy. That is entrenched racism in this country. I need us to be, last but not least, Carol, is my last point, weathering. Dr. Geronimus in 1990, a researcher, University of Michigan, coined the phrase weathering. Look her up. She just released a book about a year and a half ago called Weathering. In her concept of weathering, they were looking at Black women's fertility. Why was it in 1990 that Black women were not surviving pregnancy? They were having adverse outcomes. Their babies were dying. She looked at that and decided her research would be focused on that. What she found out in her study was that the Black women the argument in 1990 was they were dying and suffering at higher rates because the Black women were too young. They were teen mothers. She debunked that myth and found out that the healthiest babies and the healthiest mothers, let's say the healthiest mothers, were the teen mothers, and the babies born to those teens were the healthiest babies. It debunked that myth that it was a teen pregnancy issue. She coined the phrase weathering, that sustained exposure to socioeconomic adversity, political marginalization, racism, and perpetual discrimination can actually harm your health. So I asked the question, what are you weathered to as you think about all the conditions and circumstances that could be killing you right now? I asked the question as the researchers said to a group of people in the audience, they said, I want to introduce you to weathering. Leave it on that slide. So introduce to weathering. We asked Black parents to rate their kids' asthma from 1 to 10. The Black mothers in that study rated their kids' asthma 3, 4s, and 5s. The doctors came and evaluated those same kids, and they were 8, 9s, and 10s and said, that's weathering. You get so used to doing the Alupent and the Flovent 2, 3 times a day, sitting out of gym is not going to work. If you're my mother, I sat out of gym, sitting in the emergency room 2, 3 times on a quarter, that it becomes normal to be sick. So I ask the question to you, what are you weathered to in the United Kingdom? What are you weathered to in the United States? Disparate treatment by doctors and physicians, incarceration rates, Black and brown folks, nonviolent drug offenses, serving long sentences, stripped from their families and their communities, our housing insecurity, over-policing and excessive police force in our neighborhoods, community violence, discrimination on our jobs and our employment, disparate impact and climate change, anti-immigrant policies, microaggressions, high rates of uninsurance or underinsurance. 49 million people didn't have health insurance in the United States before the Affordable Care Act. 49 million people couldn't take out a card to get their teeth taken care of, or their mental health, or their substance use disorder, or that cancer in their side that was a stage 1, that if they had caught it, it could have been a stage 1, but now it's a stage 4. That's what that meant when Obamacare, Affordable Care Act was passed. It saved lives. But yet you got gaslighted to say it was socialism and it was an intrusion into people's personal choice. This was a fundamental, Dr. King said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. That's actually not what he said. So if you Google that, you get that quote, it's a lie. He actually said of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health, he didn't say healthcare, is the most shocking and inhuman, not inhumane. Take the difference in those words. Health is broader than healthcare, and inhumane is a courtesy word. Inhuman means I don't even respect your right to have access to health insurance. I don't respect your right to have equal access to healthcare. I don't respect your right to live. That's what he said when he was standing outside in Chicago of the Medical Committee of Human Rights in 1966, because hospitals were segregated in 1966. Just a historical minute ago. A historical minute ago, Medicaid and Medicare integrated our hospital systems in this country. Thank you. I'm sorry I did not get through Quantum Leap. I could talk about sports and housing and education and legal. Charles Hamilton Houston said, when he won a case in the 1960s to get a Black man admitted to a University of Maryland, Thurgood Marshall called him and said, hey, you should take this case. He won the case and people were celebrating him. And he said, you know what? That's not victory. I won that case, but that's not victory. As the Black man got admitted and white students started withdrawing because they felt if they had to sit next to a Black man in class, that the academic rigor of the school immediately fell when he got admitted. I need you to understand how pervasive racism is. Charles Hamilton Houston said, no, the real battle is in the hearts and minds of people, not in the courtroom, the classroom, the city council hearing, the school committee. We need to do battle with ignorance one-on-one. and conversation and debate. And I thank you for having me today.
Woo! Woo, woo, woo! Oh my goodness. Woo!
Wow.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Let me pull things up so that we will get going with our panel. Michael Curry, oh my goodness. Amazing, just amazing. And I'm glad that you can stay a little while. I know that you got a plane to catch, but we want to move right into our panel. We had a wonderful UK video we were going to show, but this was significant. We know how flexible we can be. And I'm now going to bring up Bill Wells. Let me see if I can bring you up. Let me do this. And then we're going to march right into our panel, which will obviously include impactful comments about Michael Curry and the amazing things that he has said. So let me do that right now. There we are. All right. Please give Michael Curry a big round of applause. Amazing. Bill Wells, take it away. I'm on fire.
Okay. Okay, Michael. Michael. We've been together before. You ratcheted it up a notch today. So thank you for your comments. Actually, I mean, not just thank you, but really appreciate the platform that you just created. I made a number of notes, far too many to go through, but I believe everyone probably, I've been watching the chat also, lots of questions, a lot of comments coming through. Carol, we have this recorded, correct?
Yes, yes.
And I believe that for anyone that's on this platform today, if you didn't capture everything, I know everybody's probably taking notes, might be a good idea to go back and even just rewatch this. So Michael, again, thank you profoundly for just stepping into the gap for today, providing those kind of comments. I mean, Carol and I have been texting back and forth like just let's keep going. We've got panelists and we're going to shift into a different mode at this point. But again, great thanks to you, Michael, for setting the stage. And I think the panelists probably are thankful for hearing your comments as well. What a profound Black History Month message. Profound. And there is one comment that I made, and Michael, while you're still with us, and it just hit me because we've heard this before, and it kind of goes like this. If you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Yep.
Everything I heard that you mentioned, I mean, we see ourselves living it today over and over, in a different form. But I mean, what we see with ICE is kind of like the slave catchers back hundreds of years ago. I mean, so we're repeating the same sorts of things. So that makes it, the question to me is like, is racism a solvable issue? And I'll leave that question out there because it is it's big. So with that,
Bill, can I share one thing before I jump?
Of course.
Crispus Attucks, who most Americans know, was the first African American killed in the American Revolution, Todd. And what I'd love to share, and I didn't get a chance to share it, was people don't know his history. He was a rope maker, a mulatto. He was a former slave. Those 5 men that walked out that day and were killed by the British soldiers, when they were murdered, they lifted him up as the first African American killed. But I need you to know a little piece of history that most people don't know. One is that John Adams, who would become President Adams, was the attorney in that case defending the British soldiers. And if you look at the trial transcript, he argues that it was Crispus Attucks' size that justified the shooting. He argued that Crispus Attucks was 6'2", the average height of men was 5'6", 5'8" at that time. So when I show that slide with the history of Crispus Attucks, I jump to Michael Brown and Tamir Rice and Laquan McDonald and so many others. This is a narrative that's always been true. If I can dehumanize you, I can justify doing almost anything to you, including murdering you.
Wow. Well, we've seen it. And again, your comments really brought us to a point. So I'm going to do a hard shift. I'm going to do an introduction of our panelists, but rather than read your bios and what have you, because the people that are registered had access to your bios. these are very distinguished, three distinguished people that I'm getting ready to talk about in many different ways. So what I've asked them to do also is rather for me to read their bios or laud them with all kinds of compliments and praise and what have you, I'm going to ask them to just provide a real high-level overview of what brought them into this work. They're all practitioners, they're all experts, and the three that we have here cover different sectors in our society. We have a university professor, we've got a corporate guy here with me, my colleague from Minneapolis, Todd, and we've got Sonia, who Sonia and I started working together years ago when she was here in Minneapolis on the Multicultural Forum on Workforce Diversity, which became an international program. So I'm going to ask each of you, and I'm going to start with you, Sonia, and I'm going to just ask, give a brief overview on who you are, what you represent, and how your work advances both people, organizations, culture, and that sort of thing. And then I'm going to go sweep around, and then we'll have some commentary. We don't have a lot of time for a lot of different questions. I'm looking to see if there's any key questions coming from our audience, because we made the promise that they would be engaged, and I'd like to stick with that. So Sonia, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for the honor to be here with you today. That was such a powerful foundation for us to build on. I'm sort of still processing everything that I just heard. There's a lot of resonance with the things that I've experienced and learned over my 30-year career. Much of what was grounded in the work that I started as an equal employment opportunity counselor back in the early 90s. That's when Bill and I first met. And one of the reality checks that I gained in that role, investigating complaints of discrimination, is that racism is so insidious, it's almost impossible to prove. And despite the fact that you may not find evidence to prove that discrimination in fact took place, it does not resolve the issue. The pain and the suffering and the frustration remain a lingering problem, not just for the person who was aggrieved, but everyone who is in that experience. And so I really, from those very early days, set out to explore and understand and dissect and process what does this mean for us as a people? And I recognize that it has such harmful effects on our spirit and our overall well-being. I had not heard that concept of weathering before, but when you see then how it manifests in the significant disparities in disease and death and premature loss of life in our communities. And I'll just say, one, I just want to recognize and stand in solidarity with my Latino people across the United States who right now are facing a new form of persecution, but it is a repeat of what we have seen repeated in our history, that Latino history is also Black history. For me, the work I'm doing today is really focused on the process of healing from collective trauma. And because we know, and I had an epiphany in my career, mid-career, when I was leading diversity in the state health department, that I could spend my energy trying to change someone's mind, to stop dehumanizing, to stop brutalizing, to stop discriminating against people, or I could put my energy into helping insulate people from the rhetoric that poisons our mind, because as they are raping people's bodies, they are raping people's minds. And that creates a distortion for all of us. Gordon Allport was a scholar he wrote a book called The Nature of Prejudice in 1954. If you have not read this one, and I'll just close with this quote. He said, "Although most barking does not lead to biting, there is never a bite without barking." And just as Mr. Curry said, in the mind begins the words. The dehumanization in today's contemporary environment, the dehumanization happens through social media posts, insults on the podiums during campaigns, The dehumanization, the words of rejection are seeds that are planted in our mind, and they only grow when they're fertilized. And so if our work then is our opportunity then to pull it out by the root before it grows, then it won't move to that next stage of discrimination and inclusion, which then can descend into brutalization. Dehumanization, discrimination, and brutalization are a process. It is a playbook. It's not a new one. It goes all the way back to before the founding years, as we just heard in the history. I'm going to stop there just for the introduction for now and just say thanks, Bill, for the opportunity to join you today.
Okay, Sonia, thank you. And again, folks, as a matter of context, like I said, Sonia and I met, I don't even know how many years ago, but it was some time ago. We've steadily stayed in touch, and the work continues. So she is truly a soldier in this fight, and I don't see that she'll ever really stop. So Sonia, again, thank you for being my friend, you're now officially a part of the US-UK Summit on Race. You've earned your stripes many times over, so thank you. I'm going to shift over to the intellectual person with us today. Not that others aren't intellects, but we have a professor with us, Professor William Les Henry, and I've had the pleasure of working with, we call him Les, and we've had, because that's what he prefers. And so he's got a story to tell as well. His environment is different than both Todd and Sonia because he's been in that university setting, where teaching young minds and what have you. And quite frankly, I was profoundly struck by comments that I've heard him make before about the challenges that he's faced. And so with that, Les, give us kind of your high level overview and you do your thing, kind of like Sonia just did her thing. And Sonia, again, that was very effective. So Professor Les Henry, William Les Henry, cheers.
Okay, firstly, warmest greetings to all in attendance. Honestly, I am just, Dr. Michael Curry has just blown my head. I don't know how I would recover from 600 of those slides, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the best way for me to kind of encapsulate what I bring to the table is, and I am no longer on the plantation. I had an acrimonious divorce with the university I was affiliated with a year ago. And I remember in our pre-meeting on Monday, Sonia kind of expressed some of the concerns that I've been experiencing. But, that's another conversation another time because time is restricted today. But I want to say something to Michael that he's one of the first people that I've ever heard link the African Caribbean to the African American experience in the way that inspired me and my wonderful team to create a master's called Global Black Studies, Decolonization and Social Justice. And what was unique about that MA, which ran until, I believe it was, they killed it off when it was part of getting me out anyway. But what we did was we said we wanted to liberate our experiences as Africans, and not just Africans, because we know our Hispanophone brothers and sisters are caught in the same thing, whoever was, whether they were African chattel enslaved or indentured. We are part of that same experience. And what we did was we married that in that MA. And Michael has actually kind of given us a snapshot of the whole MA through those slides. So for instance, one of the things that I insisted upon when we wrote the business case with my wonderful colleagues, that we're calling it African chattel enslavement, because what happened to Africans is unique in the history of so-called human enslavement. So Orlando Patterson, we are the only people who suffered what he called natal alienation, i.e. the child did not belong to the mother. The child belonged to the master, which is unique. The other thing what I wanted to just convey very quickly is, Michael mentioned some really interesting things about religion. And one of the things that I used to introduce the students to was Sir Francis Drake, so-called privateer, with John Hawkins, blah, 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 whatever. But this is what he said in a so-called poem. He said, "The journey known, the passage quickly run, the land full rich, and the people easily won, whose gain shall be the knowledge of our faith, and our such riches as their countries hath." They were unequivocal in what they wanted to do with Africans. They knew we weren't uncivilized. They knew we weren't, just these savages running around with no cultures or civilizations. They knew, and they knew the best way to dominate us was to introduce us to something that we actually gave to Europeans, which is the belief in a benign and beneficent God. And if you study the anthropology of religion, you will see that in no indigenous European culture did they ever have a benign and beneficent God. You can check it out. Think about Valhalla, Hades, all of these places. It was through Batlak's culture. And one of the things that I think we need to overstand, as we say in Rastafari, or appreciate, is the fact that the reason why it's so easy for many of us as Africans or other peoples of color to embrace the notion of a benign and beneficent God is because the way it's packaged is familiar. But as Michael excellently said, we need to question some of those things. Because, for instance, Montesquieu said, we cannot suppose these people to be men, because if we are Christians and we are treating them in this way, we cannot be Christian. Therefore, Africans cannot be men. I'm paraphrasing, but you get the gist of it. So what I really want to share is that I really think that as peoples of African ancestry or other peoples of color, however we want to style ourselves, global majority peoples, we need to think about something. And I'll sum it up in a quote, a Jamaican quote. Because when you speak to Jamaicans and they think they are unlucky, then we'll say, masalt. You know that if you salt something too much, it's spoiled. But when I first started reasoning with Jamaicans and they said to me, masalt, I said, no, you've forgotten that as peoples of African ancestry, we were assaulted. It's qualitatively different. And I will leave it there. I just give thanks for the inclusion today. Bless you all.
Professor Les, thank you so much. Your comments always are very enlightening. I forgot to mention you are in the UK. I think we have Sonia's in Atlanta, East Coast. Your Professor Les is in the UK and part of the family. He's been officially greeted into the US-UK Summit on Race, so he's a member for life. Yes.
Sorry, Brother Bill, one thing I wanted to say, and this again speaks to Michael Curry's awesome suggestion. And this is by Dick Hart, who I had the pleasure of meeting. And this book is called Slaves Who Abolished Slavery. It's one of those books that I think is a must read if we really want to understand the African chattel enslavement experience and how we resisted and transcended. Because if we were not transcendental people, we would not be having this conversation today.
Right. Yes. Very, very good. Well put. So, as they say, last but certainly not least, I'm going to introduce you to Todd Williams, my good friend here in Minneapolis. So, Todd is kind of the how do I identify you, Todd? You're corporate, but you're university. You're teaching classes in racial justice. He's a bad brother. He covers much of it. But seriously, Todd, the thing I like about Todd is the way he thinks. My experience in having conversations with him, they're crisp, they're solid, there's a lot of clarity, and there's focus. And he manages to cover a broad swath of issues in a way that is understandable. And maybe that's, Todd, why you are teaching young folks in a university setting, because you can't be too lofty and high level. You've got to get right to the issues. But again, Todd, you're here with me, and we're both seeing the reality of what we're dealing with, this government imposed and sanctioned occupation. I'm going to leave it to you. We've got a little time. You can take some time, but not too much. And then I'm looking to see if we've got any key questions that are directed toward any one of the panelists. But take it away, Todd. So it's all yours.
Perfect. Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to be in the esteemed presence of Professor Les, Dr. Alvarez, and Dr. Curry. I've been moved greatly within the conversations that we've already had today. Just by quick mode of introduction, Todd Williams, I am from Minnesota and the Minneapolis area. Spent a very short period of time in Atlanta, Georgia, and have spent 30 years in the corporate America space, with the last 5 serving as the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that that's important because once I left the corporate space, I really invested my time, energy, and efforts in starting my own firm to help other companies and organizations really think through not just diversity, equity, inclusion, but what are the myths or the misconceptions that needed to be kind of addressed as they thought about their strategies and the role that race would play in that. While starting my own firm, I also was able to connect with a colleague at the University of Minnesota. And we had a challenge following the murder of George Floyd, but also an opportunity to rethink how businesses and how leaders really engaged in the topic. And what I loved about what what Dr. Curry had spoke about was this notion of people's inability to pass the test. Right? We talk about the transatlantic slave trade, and folks don't understand chattel slavery or what that truly entails. And so my colleague and I, we took what we believed at the time was a bold step and said, let's move the conversation upstream. Let's really focus our efforts on helping the future leaders going into the corporate space build their knowledge base so that they can help us to eliminate some of the inequities and discrimination and practices there. So as a result of that, we created a course called Race, Power, and Justice in Business, which is, to our knowledge, the only course taught like that in the business school, because we spend a significant amount of energy sharing the roots of capitalism, the roots and the role that colonialism played in driving some of the businesses and the business strategy. I also love the fact that, the U.S. is built on the basis of race and those folks that contributed significantly, whether it's 3/5 or whatever percentage of folks, but then also, how do we also find our way out of this in today's construct as far as creating meaningful solutions? And I would argue, I love that point of, if you don't understand the past, you're doomed to replay it. How do we invest our time, energy, and effort in bringing the future business leaders squarely into the conversation of the role that race has played and the role they can play in disrupting that default to think very differently about creating that space? And so by a little longer than a short introduction, I just wanted to introduce myself, and I just wanted to, again, just thank you all for the opportunity to be in community with you all here today.
Well, thank you, Todd. And Todd, the thing I can really appreciate about the work that you're doing is you moved from the corporate gig that we all, at one point in our careers, we all ascribe to. We wanted to get that one right job. But as a consultant, having your own business, it gives you the freedom or the flexibility to meet with a lot of different people. And I think and I've been in a similar situation. What happens is, through that process, you hear a lot of different voices, a lot of different views on what we try. Here in this summit and all across the country, DEI practitioners and all kinds of HR analysts are trying to figure out, what problem are we really trying to solve? And so as I listen to Brother Curry and Sonia's positioning and Professor Les and you, the question that I have is, and it's kind of a big one, and we'll spend a little time, the three of us, is what we're doing, are we really making progress? And I say that not glibly, but I think about, we're either making progress toward addressing racism, or it's stuck, or we're regressing. And it makes me wonder. So I'm going to toss it out to the panel here. I'm looking at any questions that are coming up, but for now, I'll just put that out to the panel. What are we doing? Are we really making any headway towards something that would say solving America's #1 problem, that being racism? And I'll leave it. Who would like to go first? I mean, Todd, you're on. I don't know if the others are on mute.
I'm happy to get started.
Go ahead, Sonia. Yeah.
We talk about this quite a bit, my husband and I, thinking about this next generation and how well equipped are they to be able to deal with the insidiousness and now the very blatant and hateful rhetoric and escalation into violence. And I think that, growing up in the 70s and 80s, I feel very fortunate that in many ways we were kind of protected from some of those sort of brutal experiences. But I would say that many of our young people, because we want to create a better life for our children, our grandchildren, many of us insulated them from having to protect themselves. And I think it is detrimental. It is a risk to their life to not teach them and prepare them how to defend themselves. And in this space, in this moment, and watching, heartbreakingly what is unfolding in my hometown of Minneapolis, begs the question of, where do we put our energy? Because the intentionality of what we are facing right now is to exhaust us, is to throw so much chaos and confusion and harm that we don't know which way to expend our energy. Do we expend our energy fighting against the forces that intend to brutalize us? Or do we expend our energy protecting and healing and preserving our own peace? And I would suggest, for me thinking about it's not one or the other, it's both and. But we have to conserve enough energy to be able to take care of our own well-being. Find our locus of control. I was listening to a podcast the other day. There are all kinds of forms of protest. There's a form of protest where you get on a panel like this, or you engage in a conversation. It's a form of protest. You go in the street with a sign. Other forms of protest are holding your money back, deciding we're not going to spend our money with organizations that do not value our humanity. That is protest. Protest also looks like taking care of ourselves, taking time for rest, for healing, for preservation of our spirit. The ability to weather the storm. I hadn't heard weathering in that way, but we have got to protect our body, mind, and spirit from the things that we are being fed. We do not have to consume everything that we're fed. The knowledge that we got this morning, today, all of this deep insight on the history, we got to go seek that. But if we only allow ourselves to consume the garbage that is easy for us to access on social media and all this other propaganda, it's going to poison us, body, mind, and spirit.
Yes. Well, Professor Les, I know you're still with us. Comments, thoughts?
All I can really do is just mirror what was suggested, because I think oftentimes we get far too distracted. And sometimes we don't look in the places where we can be, I don't even want to use the word educated or edified, where we can embrace in different types of reasoning. So for instance, when Michael was talking about the quantum leap, the first thing that came into my mind was a song by KRS-One called The Devil's Crown. And he's actually made me rethink how I will use that song, because in a lot of my teaching, I use popular culture. That's what I do, because I find that, oftentimes if we go the chalk and talk academic route, it's too boring. But if we use popular culture, you will find that people will, I don't know, embrace the reasoning in a different way. Because I'll give you a very quick example. I've written about this. So as a child, born in the 50s, my sanity and the way I survived white racism, when I'm talking about, they could call us niggers, wogs, coons, Spains, you know, white men would jump out of their cars and attack us as 11-year-olds, which is why I've always been a martial artist and I still am to this day. But the way I was, my little sanctum or whatever it was Marvel Comics, believe it or not. And I remember when I came across the X-Men as a child in the 60s, whenever it was, I didn't really appreciate why it resonated with me so much until I became an adult. Because that's when I learned it was Stan Lee was Stan Lieber. Remember, because he was Jewish and the way the Jews were persecuted at the time, he couldn't even say his name was Stan Lieber. He had to call himself Stan Lee. And when he created the X-Men, which is common knowledge now, it was Dr. Martin Luther King and Magneto. Magneto was Malcolm X. And I remember when I used to say that to people, so I remember this was probably in the late 1990s, early 2000s, I used to do youth work sessions and I would introduce them to the characters, you know, before Hollywood or whatever it is they are now, the Marvel Universe. And I remember people used to think I was crazy. But now, when myself and there's a brother called Brother Hakeem, we do a lot of film breakdowns, people are astounded because I can show them a clip from a particular Spider-Man film when he gets taken over by a black Spider-Man. Now you watch that film again and you will see that every pejorative, negative stereotype of the black male is encapsulated in Spider-Man becoming black. He gets funky, he boxes up his woman, he kills somebody. And I remember when I was 1996, my mentor, a guy called Professor Herbert Ekwekwe, peace be upon him, I've always said he was the cleverest human being I ever met. Would not call himself Nigerian, he was Igbo. And I remember he invited me to a conference. I was an undergraduate then because I returned to education in my late 30s or mid 30s, I can't remember. But anyway, I met a brother called Mwalimu Shuja, who many of you may know. And I remember I was reasoning with him about, you know, the black experiences and similarities, you know, across the pond. He said one of the most profound things to me that has always stuck with me. He said, your concerns in the UK seem to be the same concerns we have in the States. And I said, what is that? He says, you need to understand the difference between an African American and an African in America. And then he quoted Malcolm X. And he said to me, it looks like a lot of the people who are in England, who are at the forefront, are African British and not Africans in Britain, whether they come from the continent or the Caribbean. And it just made me rethink my approach to our collective liberation, because I think one thing that came through Michael's wonderful presentation is we are still, as global majority people, absolutely interchangeable. If we walk down the streets in England, all of us on this panel, we're going to get the same treatment. I've been to many states in America. I remember once I nearly got arrested in New York. And you know how I got out of it? I went, oh, come off it, mate. I just came from London. I don't know what you're on about. As soon as they knew I weren't an African American, they had to change. So I think we need to really think about this notion that as peoples, global majority, African Americans, Hispanic, however we want to style ourselves, we are still absolutely interchangeable to the white world, which is focused on white supremacist thought and action. And in fact, a book I'm working on at the moment is called Whiteness as Rightness, because one of the things that happened to me whilst I was a professor at the university, they told me I was one of the most esteemed, blah, 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 whatever. And yet a minor white lecturer who just got a PhD totally undermined me just because she was white. So I think we need to really consider our positionality in these kinds of discussions or discourses or whatever we want to call these kind of reasonings. So I hope that kind of makes sense.
Oh, very much, very much. Again, always, each one of you, powerful. Todd, you're gonna have the last word, and then I'm gonna switch it back to Carol. So, again, Sonia, Dr. Les, wow, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. So I don't have a lot to add. I just want to accentuate, I think a point that Dr. Alvarez spoke to very, very crisply is that I think that when we talk about progress, right, we talk about progress from race and certain identities. And I think we need to like pause that and really talk about the humanity. Because when you get to the humanity, that's when we can talk about those health determinants. We can talk about the lives of the people and talk about how we improve those lives of the people, because the systemic nature of all of this is impacting lives, right? We can talk about redlining, we can talk about home, we can talk about wealth, affordability. All those things are part of a systemic system that if you're talking about the impacts on Black people or the by class, we can have those conversations all day, but the impacts are actually happening into people's lives. And I thought that that was very, very nicely portrayed. And then the final thing I would add to your original question was, you know, have we progressed? And I think until we actually acknowledge the role that race and slavery has played into those 250 years or before, until we truly acknowledge that, I don't think that we can truly progress. I think we've kidded ourselves or masqueraded some progress, but I don't think that we've actually truly progressed because we haven't acknowledged how we get to this moment in time or this moment in history.
Absolutely.
Strong statements. Very, very good. Very good. So with that, again, thank you to the panelists. Carol?
Well, this
It's
could go
yours.
on.
It's yours.
This could go on and on and on. I'd ask Deandra to pull up questions. I know the chat has been amazing. We've had close to 100 people on Zoom throughout. So, Deandra, if you would come off mute and ask any, present any questions that have bubbled up from our audience, that would be wonderful.
So the questions that have been asked have basically been answered by panelists already. Folks asked about the books that you all brought up, and so that those have been answered in the chat. And so as you all have been speaking, folks have more so been agreeing than asking questions.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask my colleague, Dr. Garth Dallas, to come off mute. I'm going to bring you up so that you can, as we are getting to the end of our program, ask any questions or have any insight that can be rendered important in terms of this conversation.
Thank you very much, Carl. It's been really, really enlightening. Great discussions. I would love if we have time just to tease out a question which speaks to the topic. What do you believe is the current state of race in the US, the UK, and by extension, the rest of the world in today's rapidly changing world where power is vested in such a way that the most powerful person in the world is pretty much behaving, if I can say this, in what would be considered a dictatorial manner, which breaches, if you like, so many aspects of the founding constitution which America was created on. Who want to take that one on? The current state of race. Go ahead, Dr. Alvarez.
So I'll get us kicked off on this. For me, I think what's at risk the most is the human race. And I think there is a tremendous threat to the vitality, the lives and the livelihood of all of us as human beings. I see where we're entering existentially. I want to address the question in the chat from Dr. Ford around the link between adverse childhood experiences, maternal health outcomes, and just recognize, while I spent some time doing health equity work when I was in public health, it's really important to unpack that, because the disproportionate rates of death and disease, and particularly the maternal deaths that are happening disproportionately to Black women, is the manifestation of socially constructed systemic mechanisms designed to have that very effect. So I think we should be paying attention to the impact that all of this is having, certainly disproportionately on people of African descent, but also all of us as human beings, because we are all in this together.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Todd.
Dr. Dallas, I might throw just a little twist on the question you had asked, and what I would say is that what we're seeing here locally is a different manifestation of this notion of racism and what's covert and what's overt, because with the current activities that are happening here locally, right? It's about race, it's about class, it's about immigration, it's all these things. But at the end of the day, people feel permissioned to take Black and brown people out of their situation. The decisions are being made based on skin color. So if you're driving down this, like we talked for many years about, traveling while Black or driving while Black, like that has become a serious, significant, and very real and tangible threat in the current environment. And the fact that there's no broader uprising or outcry from that is really, really concerning, because I think when you think about the state of race, Minneapolis might be ground zero of a conversation, but it's continuing to manifest itself in other parts of the broader, the US for sure, because it's become normalized. It's become normalized that we have federal agents, troops, you name it, that have been deployed to cities, and then the ability in those spaces and environments for them to take Black and brown folks out of either their home, their cars, their situation, their workplaces is really, really, I think, troubling, and should be troubling for all of us. To, again, Dr. Alvarez's point, it's an attack on humanity.
Absolutely. And we here in the UK know that it's not just a US issue. Traditionally people say that we got stiff upper lip and stuff like that. It has been emboldened here in the UK as well. More recently, there was a report that was written that we live in a post-racial society. People like me and Professor Les spoke out against that. So over to you, Les. What's your position on the state of race at this present moment from a UK perspective?
Well, to be honest, the context of the UK mirrors, especially what Dr. Sonia has said, it mirrors the USA. And the reason why I say that is because one of the things that, I don't know if it was Michael or someone else on the panel, basically said that, firstly, race, people don't take race seriously. As far as they're concerned, we're post-racial, as you just suggested. But more importantly, Black History Month is more or less non-existent in the UK now. It was introduced in October, I think it was 1986 or 1987. Might be 85, I can't remember. But it is non-existent now. I'll give you the best example. Where I used to teach at this university, when I first joined there in 2014, they would have posters for Black History Month. I would say over the last 4 or 5 years I was there, definitely post-COVID, nothing of note. But if it was LGBTQ, blah, 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 whatever, emblazoned all over the place. in fact, for those months, they would take over the whole library space. You couldn't get away from it. And to be honest, that is one of the concerns that we share globally, especially as global majority people. And for those of us who are so-called ethnically ambiguous and think it doesn't really impact them, we'll see. We'll see what happens in the future. Because, you know, it's interesting. I used to say this to students. I used to say to them, if the UK passed a law and said, right, every person of color has to go, who do you think would be the most fearful of that day? And I would throw this out to the panel. In the context of the UK, if they got rid of every person of color, so everyone in the UK was white, who do you think would be the most fearful? Anybody. The Irish. Because until 30 years ago, they were the niggers of Europe. Read Asimov's work. People don't like when we speak that way, but that's why I introduce my students to. In fact, a lot of the stuff that they use to say that Africans were unchristian, etc., blah, 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 the British, or the English, I should say, were the dominant at the time, utilized that against the Irish. The Irish were 3/5 of a human being a long time before they told us Africans were. Just look at the history. Look at St. Patrick's Day, the running of the snakes out of people, out of the UK. And the snake people, the Druids, who some people say were gypsies, Egyptians, so they were embracing African knowledge and sensibilities. Depends on whose construction of history you go by. But that's what I think. I think it's prudent for us to realize that, in fact, Neely Fuller Jr. said it when he spoke about the areas of human activity. One of the things he said is, as peoples of African ancestry, we want to mind we don't swap one slave master for another. And I think that is really profound.
Absolutely spot on. And the most important thing from this final question is Dr. Sonia's comment. We're all in this together. And it's become even clearer with the attacks in the US that individuals who voted for Trump and felt that they were part of the chosen few are now coming under attack themselves, and they're now realizing that we are all in this together. We're all people, and we all have to fight against injustices right across the world. Back to you, Bill and Carol.
Well, let me see if I can pull myself up on, here we go. I'm going to move that down and move that and then bring you all on. We clearly could have continued this conversation for another 3 hours, just to do justice to it, because it is vital. It is rich. It is what we need to hear about. I'm not sure if Michael Curry is still here, but we're just singing your praises. Michael, are you still here, or are you on the road to the airport? He may be in transit at this point in time. This has been an incredible program. Again, we've had nearly 100 on Zoom throughout. I've been doing my little dance, moving images around as I continue with Ecamm, but I thank you so much for your patience. We've recorded everything, and I want to thank Michael for allowing us. At first, he was not going to give us permission to use his slides, so thank you very much for doing that. Really appreciate that. Let me bring Garth up as well. Garth, hang on. Let me bring you up. I don't want to leave you out. Okay, there we up.
I can see myself on.
Okay. Well, I may have to toggle back and forth between folks. Very quickly, I'll give my remarks last, but Bill, you can make your closing comments. Again, we thank our speakers, Sonia, Todd, Professor Les, and Michael Curry. Wow, Bill, take it away. Closing comments.
I'll be very, very quick. To me, Carol, I mean, we've been doing this for 5 years. This had to be, I'm looking for a word, one of the most impactful conversations that we've had, I believe, in quite some time. We really, three different perspectives and a keynote speaker that just killed it. And our panelists have added such richness to this discussion. I hope the participants and such got as much out of it as I did. I mean, I'm stunned actually. I'm just sitting here just thinking about what we've uncovered. And it feels like this is like part one, not even part two. I mean, this is a discussion that needs to continue, and we need to dig deep and we need to be real about it. The profound insights that have come up into today's discussion, we oftentimes don't talk about them. We talk about how do we measure progress with DEI and what have you. Forget that. It is, as Dr. Sonia said, and Todd and Professor Les, it's about the humanity. You know, we talk about here in Minneapolis, and I'll get off my kick, but we talk about the economic impact of the ICE occupation here. Nobody's talking about the human toll. And I've been meeting with people that live in the neighborhood. I met with somebody the other day who lives 2 blocks from where Renee Good was murdered. He came into my meeting, said he was exhausted. Fear is just prevalent. So on their behalf, we need to think about not just having a comfortable conversation among us. We need to think about the humanity, the toll on humanity that racism is just killing it. So I'll shut it down at that point. But there's more to this discussion than what we had today. Thank you to all the folks that really contributed. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. Appreciate that. And I'm thinking about Michael Curry's title, Quantum Leap. We're going to have to explore that more. Dr. Garth Dallas, your feedback,
Well, I will just echo everything Bill has said, but let me just go back to the lesson that we learned from the Germans via Martin Niemöller's quote. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. It's a powerful quote, and even more so in the context of our discussion today and what Dr. Alvarez has been saying. Martin Niemöller was an anti-communist, anti-Semitist Protestant pastor who supported the rise of the Nazi Party and voted for them in 1933. He then regretted that for the rest of his life and started to speak out against the regime in 1934. It was a bit too far, too late in his opinion when Hitler tried to take control of the churches, suppressing religious freedom. Niemöller was arrested in 1937 for speaking out about that injustice. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and we can learn from it. Even if you're not a migrant, even if you're not the radical left, even if you're not a student or a lawyer or a journalist, or you don't live in a blue state, even if you don't think you will be affected, be on the right side of history. Our statement speaks to that. We're asking our audience to speak up. Let's not be fooled by the narrative that was put to us today by the brilliant Michael Curry when they said, never been a multiracial society which has existed with such mutual intimacy and harmony in the history of the world. Let's not be fooled by that. We're under attack. We're all under attack, and we need to speak out. And that's why this platform has been created, to allow you to understand and to learn from each other and understand that Black history is everybody's history. Thank you very much.
And there you have it. The opinions, the perspectives, the ideologies, the marching orders that all of us now have. We know what we have to do. We know how we need to do things. We will continue our platform and our conversations with US UK Summit on Race. Next program will be the Multicultural Symposium Series Empowerment Breakfast next month on March 12th. We'll give you the continued rundown. I want to have my speakers to leave and then come back on Zoom, please, so we can have a quick debrief. But again, we're serious about this. That's why we decided to keep race in our topic, in our top line, so that we will always understand the manifestations of race, as Michael Curry has shared with us, and the job and the role that we have in order to move things forward. The statement will come out in the next couple of days. You will have a chance to have access to it and pass it on. Thank you so much for being with us, to sharing your ideas with us. The best is going to be yet to come. We don't want to repeat our past. And as long as you stay with us and are proactive in terms of preserving democracy, we will have a future. Thank you all so much. Take care. God bless. And we will see you the next time. Thank you. Speakers, dial and then come back into the Zoom room. Thank you.